A former slot technician just revealed 9 specific slot machines that casinos absolutely love because they drain your money faster than almost anything else on the floor. Number 7 has a hidden feature that makes you think you're about to win big, but it's all programmed to keep you losing. These slots that we're about to break down are the exact games that insiders say to avoid if you actually want a fair chance. Let's start with the first one, the so-called 3, 4, and 5x pay games. You've probably walked past these machines 100 times without thinking much about them. They've got that old-school look, almost retro with simple symbols, muted colors, and none of the flashy animations you see on the newer slots. At first glance, they just feel familiar. Comfortable even. Just classic reels and those multipliers sitting right there on the screen, quietly promising to triple, quadruple, maybe even quintuple your bet if things line up just right. And honestly, that's exactly why people trust them. When you see a multiplier like that, it genuinely feels like you're getting something extra, like the game is actually giving you an edge. Your brain doesn't stop to analyze some complicated payout structure. It just sees bigger numbers and assumes better value. But here's where former casino technicians say the illusion really starts working against you. What most players never realize is that these games are often overloaded with multipliers, and that design choice comes at a cost. All those chances to multiply a win have to be balanced somehow. And the way the machine does that is by filling the game with far more blanks and non-paying line hits than people expect. You see reels spinning, symbols lining up, things almost happening, but very little money actually coming back. And underneath all of that, those multipliers are usually sitting on top of extremely small base payouts. So even when the machine finally does give you a win, there just isn't much real money there to multiply. The screen makes it feel exciting in the moment, but once the spin is over, the payoff is usually far less satisfying than you thought it would be. It also explains why these machines can feel so slow and punishing over time. Many of them stretch out the space between real wins, sometimes for a long while. You can sit there spinning, watching activity on the reels, without hitting anything meaningful, and when a payout finally lands, even a 5 times multiplier barely makes a dent if it's multiplying something tiny to begin with. Former casino staff will tell you this is a big reason these machines stick around. They feel smart to play. All those multipliers create confidence, the sense that you've chosen something safer, maybe even more strategic, even though the underlying math is still doing exactly what the casino wants it to do. People stay seated longer, they keep betting steadily, and over time, more money quietly cycles through the machine. This same structure is also why casinos are comfortable tying some of these games to massive progressive jackpots. The volatility is so extreme that by the time one of those progressives finally hits, the machine has usually taken in far more than it ever gives back. The prize looks life-changing, but the odds of actually seeing it are so low that most players will never come close. Floor managers have also pointed out that you'll usually find these games in areas where older players or classic slot fans tend to hang out. That crowd typically isn't chasing explosive wins. They come in with a budget, sit down, and play patiently for long stretches. And these machines are almost perfectly tuned for that kind of behavior, offering just enough small wins to keep things feeling alive while quietly wearing down a bankroll. One former technician from Atlantic City told me about a regular he nicknamed Multiplier Mike. Every Tuesday afternoon, Mike would show up, sit at the same classic 3 to 5 times pay machine, and play for hours. He was absolutely convinced he'd figured it out. He kept notebooks, tracked which days the multipliers seemed to show up more often, and genuinely believed the machine went through hot and cold phases. Over 2 years, that one machine took more than $40,000 from him. And the whole time, Mike felt like he was just one good run away from proving his system worked. According to people who've worked these floors, a lot of these older multiplier games rely on payout designs that create long dry spells, broken up by wins that look exciting but don't actually return much money. There's nothing loud or dramatic about how they do it. They just sit there letting people play longer and longer, and before you realize it, far more money has gone through the machine than you ever planned. And that slow, almost boring pace is exactly what makes them so effective. So if you ever spot one of these on the casino floor and think it looks harmless, or maybe even clever, that's kind of the point. You're not choosing a smarter slot. You're choosing a game that's designed to feel fair while steadily working against you. But here's what's really disturbing about these retro machines. And it connects to something you'll see with the licensed games we'll talk about later. Stay tuned for that. Machine number 2, Huff and Puff Power 4. Now we're stepping into more modern slot design, and Huff and Puff Power 4 is a perfect example of how these newer games can look fun on the surface while quietly being brutal to play. At first glance, it doesn't feel threatening at all. It's colorful, lighthearted, almost storybook-like, with the big bad wolf, the 3 little pigs, cheerful animations, and constant activity on the screen. It feels like the kind of game you'd play just for entertainment, even if you weren't expecting to win much. There's always something happening, always something lighting up, always a reason to stay engaged. But former casino technicians say that's exactly where the problem starts. The Power 4 version takes an already difficult base game and spreads it across 4 active windows at the same time. And while that sounds exciting, it completely changes how your money is actually being used. Whatever you're betting per spin isn't going toward one game, it's being divided across 4 separate windows. So even when you do get a solid-looking line hit, it's often only paying off a fraction of what you thought you were betting on that spin. Before I tell you what makes this version especially deceptive, take a second to subscribe and drop a comment sharing the biggest win you've ever had and which machine it happened on. What makes this especially frustrating is that most spins don't win on all 4 windows. More often than not, you'll see activity in one window, maybe 2 if you're lucky, while the others do nothing at all. That means even good spins tend to give you back far less than you put in, and far less than the same hit would have paid on a standard, single-window version of the game. On top of that, the game leans heavily into progress-based mechanics. You're constantly collecting symbols, unlocking hats, watching meters fill up, and feeling like you're getting closer to something big. The game does a great job of making you feel like you're building momentum, but according to former employees, that sense of progress is mostly psychological. The final pieces you need to unlock the bigger features are weighted to appear much less often, so you spend a lot of time hovering just short of the payoff. The result is a play experience filled with frequent small hits. You'll see wins pop up fairly often, sometimes more often than on older slots. But when you look closely, most of those wins are smaller than your original bet. The game celebrates them anyway. Sounds go off, animations trigger, the wolf huffs and puffs, and your brain registers it as success even though your balance is quietly dropping. Former slot techs describe this as a classic case of losses disguised as wins, and they say Power 4 leans into it aggressively. The constant feedback keeps your attention locked in, making it surprisingly hard to notice how fast your credits are disappearing. It doesn't feel like a slow grind. For many players, it's more like a steady drain that suddenly becomes obvious only after a large chunk of money is already gone. Floor supervisors have said they've watched players sit at Huff and Puff Power 4 for hours, genuinely believing they were holding their own because the screen kept telling them they were winning. But the credit meter told a very different story. Even players with larger budgets would see that money disappear far faster than they expected, simply because every decent-looking hit was only paying off one slice of what they were actually wagering. And even when the bonus features finally trigger, the frustration doesn't really stop. Opening additional windows during the feature sounds exciting, but fully unlocking all 4 is extremely rare. Most players never see it happen, so you end up chasing a version of the game that almost no one ever gets to play in full. Taken together, former casino workers say Huff and Puff Power 4 manages to combine some of the toughest aspects of modern slot design into one machine. Divided bets, infrequent meaningful hits, constant sensory stimulation, and progress mechanics that keep you chasing just a little longer than you should. It looks friendly, it feels busy, it's always entertaining. But beneath all of that, it's one of those games where money can disappear far faster than most players realize, even when it feels like things are going okay. And speaking of games that keep you entertained while draining your wallet, the space-themed machine later on this list uses an even sneakier trick borrowed from mobile gaming. We'll get to that one soon. Machine number 3, licensed games. Licensed games deserve their own spot on this list, because almost no other category manages to be this consistently bad for players. Any slot machine based on a movie, TV show, musician, or celebrity falls into this group. You've seen them everywhere. Machines themed around massive franchises, famous bands, iconic characters, or well-known personalities. The branding is the whole point. It's familiar, it's exciting, and it immediately grabs your attention. But that familiarity comes at a cost most players never stop to think about. Former casino industry workers explain that licensed games are incredibly expensive to put on the floor. Casinos have to pay enormous licensing fees just to use those names and images. And that money doesn't come out of thin air. It gets built directly into the math of the machine. What that usually means is simpler than it sounds. Licensed slots tend to give back less to players over time than comparable non-licensed games sitting just a few rows away. The theme might be better, the visuals more impressive, but the actual value of what you're playing is often worse. People who've worked behind the scenes say a standard slot is typically balanced to return a relatively higher portion of what players put in, while licensed machines are often set noticeably lower to make up for those branding costs. Over long sessions, that difference adds up fast. You might not feel it spin by spin, but over the course of a night, licensed games quietly take more and give back less. And once you start looking at casino floors through that lens, the placement of these machines makes a lot more sense. Casinos don't give licensed games premium locations because they're generous or because they want to enhance your entertainment. They do it because these machines make money. Former floor managers say they know exactly how powerful brand recognition is. When someone spots a slot tied to a show they love or a band they grew up with, logic takes a back seat. People sit down because of emotion, not because they've compared payout structures. That emotional pull is especially effective on casual gamblers, people on vacation, first-timers, or players who don't visit casinos often. They're not checking return percentages or hit frequencies. They're there for the experience. They want to play the slot tied to their favorite series or celebrity, and the casino fully understands that. One former slot manager from Las Vegas shared a story that still stuck with him. At the height of a hugely popular TV series, right after its final season aired, a woman flew in from out of state specifically to play those themed machines. She'd built her entire trip around it, saved up a couple $1,000s, and spent hours hopping between different versions of the same licensed slot. In less than 3 hours, all of that money was gone. What made it worse, the manager said, was knowing that those machines were set significantly tighter than many of the standard slots nearby. The branding brought her in, but the math ensured she never really had a chance. And there's another detail former employees often point out. Licensed games usually don't come cheap to play because casinos know people will sit down regardless of the odds. They're comfortable setting higher minimum bets. It's common to see licensed slots start at much higher denominations than generic machines, which means more money flowing through the game with every spin. So between higher minimum bets, lower long-term returns, and the emotional pull of familiar brands, licensed slots manage to hit players from every angle at once. On the surface, they come across as fun and familiar, tapping into nostalgia and the promise of entertainment, even though that feeling has very little to do with how the game actually treats your money. But one licensed game stands alone as possibly the worst offender on the entire casino floor, and it's probably sitting in your local casino right now. Machine number 4, Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune slots deserve their own section, even though they technically fall under licensed games. They're simply too widespread to ignore. You'll find them in almost every casino you walk into, usually in high-traffic areas, with that oversized wheel sitting on top and the familiar music from the TV show playing non-stop. People recognize them instantly, and that recognition alone pulls players in. And that's exactly what makes them so dangerous. Former casino workers often point to Wheel of Fortune as one of the most misleading machines on the floor. Not because they're flashy or complicated, but because they feel safe, familiar. Players trust them in a way they don't trust unfamiliar slots, and that trust leads to longer sessions and higher losses. One of the biggest hooks is the wheel bonus itself. When it triggers, everything slows down. The lights come on, the music swells, and that massive wheel starts spinning. It feels like a big moment, like something meaningful is about to happen. But according to former slot technicians, that wheel isn't nearly as fair as it looks. Even though the wheel is divided into sections that all appear the same size, those sections are not equally likely to land. The higher-paying outcomes exist, but they're programmed to occur far less often than the smaller ones. Most of the time, the wheel is heavily weighted toward the lowest rewards, even if visually it doesn't seem that way. What makes this especially deceptive is how the bonus is actually decided. Insiders explain that the result of the wheel spin is determined the moment the bonus is triggered. The random number generator picks the outcome instantly. The spinning wheel you watch afterward isn't deciding anything. It's just animating a result that's already been locked in. That means all the suspense, all the anticipation as the wheel slows down is carefully manufactured. You're not watching chance unfold. You're watching a predetermined outcome play out in a very convincing way, and more often than not, that outcome lands on the lower end of the payout range. Former floor managers say this design is a big reason Wheel of Fortune machines are so profitable. Combine that weighted bonus structure with higher minimum bets and the nostalgic pull of a decades-old TV brand, and you get a machine that quietly takes in enormous amounts of money. Players chase the wheel, believing the big hit is just one bonus away, even as the math keeps working against them. What makes it worse is that even when players finally do trigger the bonus they've been waiting for, the payout often feels underwhelming compared to how much they've already put into the machine. The wheel spins, the music plays, and the moment feels huge, but the return rarely matches the buildup. Now, while Wheel of Fortune tricks you with a wheel that's already decided your fate, there's another machine on this list that uses stacked symbols to mess with your head in a completely different way. Machine number 5, Lanterns of the Dragon. Lanterns of the Dragon is one of those Asian-themed slots you'll see all over casino floors. Dragons, glowing lanterns, gold coins, traditional music. Everything about the presentation is built to evoke luck, prosperity, and the idea that something good is just about to happen. On the surface, it looks like a solid, familiar-style game with stacked symbols, free spin bonuses, and progressive jackpots layered on top. But former casino technicians say the way this game actually plays tells a very different story. Lanterns of the Dragon is built around extreme swings. Long stretches of nothing are common, followed by the occasional bonus or payout that pulls you back just close enough to keep hope alive. That back and forth isn't accidental. It's designed to keep players emotionally invested, riding the highs and lows without ever quite realizing how much ground they've lost over time. A big part of that experience comes from how the stacked symbols are weighted. You'll regularly see large stacks of high-paying symbols land on the first reel, and very often on the second as well. In those moments, it really feels like a massive line win is about to hit. But the third reel almost never cooperates. You're shown what you almost won over and over again, and that near miss becomes the driving force behind the next spin. Former employees explain that those near misses are incredibly effective at keeping people engaged. Seeing two reels stacked with premium symbols creates excitement, even though no actual win occurred. Your brain reacts to the visual potential, not the result, and that keeps you chasing the outcome you feel was just barely out of reach. The frustration really sets in once you finally trigger the bonus features. After grinding through countless dead spins, the game makes it feel like you've earned something meaningful. You might even trigger a double or triple pop-style bonus, which sounds promising on paper. But according to people who've played and worked around the game extensively, the bonuses themselves are often underwhelming. Even during the bonus, you're required to line symbols up from left to right to get paid, and the game is weighted so that landing the first orb, or even the second, isn't especially difficult. The problem is everything beyond that. The higher value positions, where the real payouts sit, are much harder to complete. The most rewarding outcomes are pushed to the far end of the screen, and most players never reach them. What makes this especially painful is how much effort it takes to get there. You can spend a long time chasing a bonus, finally trigger it, and then walk away with little to nothing to show for it. Former slot players and floor staff alike describe the experience as exhausting rather than exciting. Nobody enjoys grinding through dead spins just to see a bonus fall flat. Former floor supervisors also point out that games like Lanterns of the Dragon are often positioned to attract players who believe in lucky symbols or rituals. Once someone decides a game feels lucky, they tend to stick with it far longer than they should. That loyalty works in the casino's favor, especially when the underlying math of the game is far harsher than it appears. Whether you're betting small or playing at higher limits, former technicians consistently describe Lanterns of the Dragon as a game that's unusually punishing for the player. It promises luck, builds anticipation, and keeps you chasing progress. But in practice, it's one of those machines that stays hungry for your bankroll no matter how patiently you play. Remember that story about the player who lost her pension? That happened on an Asian-themed machine just like this one. But before we get to that devastating detail, there's a sci-fi machine that uses video game psychology to keep you hooked. Machine number 6, Galactic Quest. Galactic Quest is one of those slots that immediately feels different the moment you sit down. Everything about it leans into a sci-fi, high-tech vibe. Alien characters, futuristic sounds, sharp visuals, and a massive screen packed with information. There are missions to complete, levels to progress through, and multiple bonus paths running at the same time. It doesn't really feel like a traditional slot at all. It feels closer to a video game. And according to former casino employees, that's exactly the issue. Galactic Quest borrows heavily from video game design, not to give players more control, but to keep them playing longer. The missions and levels make it feel like you're accomplishing something, like you're making progress toward a goal. But underneath all of that, it's still a slot machine. Every outcome is decided by a random number generator, and none of the choices you make actually change your odds in any meaningful way. Former slot technicians explain that the multi-level structure isn't there to reward skill or strategy. It's there to create motivation that has nothing to do with money. You're encouraged to finish a mission, unlock the next stage, or activate another feature, even when those milestones don't translate into real payouts. You end up chasing progression instead of profit. Players who've spent time around the game often say the same thing. It looks interesting, but it's confusing. There's a lot happening on the screen at once, including multiple bonus mechanics and several central features interacting at the same time. Cowboy Slots described it as a game that almost requires repeated sessions just to understand how it works. And from a design standpoint, that confusion works in the casino's favor. When players aren't sure what's driving wins and losses, it becomes much harder to recognize how little value the game is actually giving back. Behind that complexity is a base game that doesn't offer much support. Former employees point out that Galactic Quest is extremely bonus reliant, with line pays that are minimal or nearly non-existent. Most spins either lose outright or return tiny amounts that don't come close to covering the bet. The game looks busy, but financially, very little is happening. Even the bonuses themselves don't live up to the build-up. There are several different bonus types, but people who've worked with or played the game extensively say they're often underwhelming, especially when compared to more straightforward hold and spin or free game features on other slots. You go through a lot of noise and animation just to arrive at payouts that feel flat. Former floor managers have noticed that this design causes players to lose track of both time and money. With constant motion, sound effects, and on-screen objectives, it's easy to stay locked into the experience without noticing how fast credits are disappearing. The stimulation stays high even when the returns stay low. Some former technicians have also pointed out that Galactic Quest uses a classic variable reward structure. After extended dry spells, the game will occasionally deliver a larger win that feels like a turning point. Not because the machine knows you're about to quit, but because the math is built to sprinkle in those moments unpredictably. That uncertainty keeps people playing, always wondering if the next spin might be the one. One former game programmer who worked on the title later admitted that this approach eventually pushed him out of the industry. He described sitting in on player testing sessions and watching people react more strongly to mission-complete animations than to actual monetary wins. Players would celebrate finishing an objective, completely missing the fact that their balance had dropped significantly in the process. He said realizing how effectively those visual rewards replaced real value was what finally made him walk away. In the end, Galactic Quest isn't dangerous because it's flashy. It's dangerous because it feels engaging without being rewarding. It keeps players busy, curious, and invested in goals that don't actually help them win. It looks like a game. It feels like progress. But according to people who've worked behind the scenes, it's one more example of how modern slots can give you everything except a fair return. Now here's the thing about Galactic Quest and its mission structure. It's deceptive, sure, but it's got nothing on machine number 7's respin feature that we mentioned at the very beginning. Machine number 7, Ultimate Firelink Triple Nova. Now we get to number 7, the one that was mentioned right at the beginning, Ultimate Firelink Triple Nova. It's part of the Firelink family, which has become one of the most recognizable and popular slot series on casino floors. Progressive jackpots, link bonuses, bright visuals, these games have built a reputation for being exciting and potentially rewarding, and a lot of players actively seek them out. That's what makes Triple Nova so disappointing. Former casino workers say this version takes everything people like about Firelink and twists it into something far less player-friendly. On paper, it sounds like an upgrade. You still have the classic fireball symbols, but now there's a triple pop element that gives you additional chances to trigger the bonus, even if you don't land the full set naturally. It feels like the game is being more generous, like it's giving you more ways to get into the feature everyone's chasing. And technically, yes, those double or triple pop bonuses can be rewarding. The problem is how rarely everything lines up. According to former slot technicians, Triple Nova has one of the weakest base games in the Firelink lineup. Line pays are minimal, often barely noticeable, which means you're burning through spins with very little coming back. The game goes quiet for long stretches, and those dead spins add up fast. You end up putting more and more money into the machine, just trying to reach a bonus that may not show up at all. When the link bonus does finally trigger, it pulls you into that familiar Firelink rhythm. Respins start, fireballs lock in place, and it feels like you're actively working toward filling the screen and hitting one of the progressives. Early in the bonus, you'll usually see a couple of additional fireballs land, which gives you that rush of momentum, the feeling that this could finally be the one. But former employees explain that this is where the illusion really sets in. The respin feature is weighted in a way that makes those early hits far more likely than the ones that come later. After the first few respins, the fireballs tend to dry up almost completely. You sit there watching spin after spin with nothing landing, knowing exactly what you're hoping for, but rarely seeing it happen. The bonus ends with only part of the screen filled, and the payout ends up being far smaller than the build-up suggested. Insiders say the vast majority of link bonuses on Triple Nova return relatively modest amounts, often nowhere near enough to cover what you spent getting there. Some bonuses barely register as wins at all, once you factor in how many spins it took to trigger them. But the game dresses those payouts up with big animations and sound effects, making them feel more meaningful than they actually are. The progressive jackpots play into this as well. Seeing the mini, minor, major, and grand amounts sitting there creates constant hope. The smaller progressives look attainable and the larger ones feel like life-changing possibilities. But former techs point out that actually landing any of those jackpots, even the smallest one, is far less likely than players realize. Most people will trigger the bonus multiple times without ever seeing anything beyond a standard credit payout. Former floor supervisors say this is why Triple Nova has earned a reputation as a bankroll eater. Players love the Firelink name. They love the way the bonus looks, and they convince themselves that sitting just a little longer will finally pay off. In reality, the base game drains money quickly, the bonuses come infrequently, and even when they arrive, they often disappoint. One former employee summed it up simply, "Triple Nova isn't a game you should ever chase. Sitting down with the goal of playing until the bonus hits is a losing mindset, because that bonus might take far longer than you expect, and when it finally shows up, there's no guarantee it will be worth the wait. It looks like Firelink. It sounds like Firelink, but according to people who've worked behind the scenes, Triple Nova quietly turns one of the most popular slot formulas into one of the most unforgiving versions players can sit down at. But if you think predetermined outcomes are bad, wait until you hear about the mythology-themed game that bombards you with so many features you can't even tell if you're winning or losing. Machine number 8, Grand Legends. Grand Legends is one of those newer slots that's been showing up more and more over the last couple of years. It leans heavily into mythology, gods, heroes, epic music, dramatic animations, and from the outside, it looks like the kind of feature-packed game that should give players plenty of chances to win. There's always something happening on the screen, always another mechanic kicking in, always another reason to stay engaged. And to be fair, a lot of people who've played it will tell you the same thing. It is fun. But former casino employees say that once you stop looking at how it feels and start paying attention to what it actually returns, the picture changes pretty quickly. Grand Legends is a textbook example of feature overload. There are expanding wilds, multiple bonus paths, free spins with increasing multipliers, and extra reveal mechanics layered on top of each other. So much is happening that it becomes genuinely difficult to keep track of what's driving your wins and losses, and according to people who've worked on these floors, that confusion isn't accidental. When players can't clearly tell what's helping them and what isn't, it becomes much harder to judge whether the game is giving fair value. Take the expanding wilds, for example. They show up often enough to keep your attention, and when one lands and stretches across an entire reel, it feels like a big moment. Your brain immediately expects a strong payout. But former slot technicians say that while those wilds are designed to appear frequently, the surrounding reels are rarely set up to cooperate. You end up seeing big visual moments over and over again without the kinds of symbol combinations that would actually turn them into meaningful wins. The same thing happens during the free spin bonuses. The multipliers climb as the feature progresses, which creates the feeling that you're building towards something significant. Each spin feels more important than the last, but insiders explain that the base wins during those spins are usually adjusted downward to compensate. So while the multiplier number gets bigger, the actual amounts being multiplied stay small. The game looks generous, but the math stays tight. Former employees also point out that Grand Legends tends to trigger bonuses relatively often, especially compared to some other modern slots. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Frequent bonuses create the impression that the game is treating you well, but when you actually track how much those bonuses return, the yield is often disappointing. Players walk away remembering how often they triggered features, not how little those features actually paid. There's also an added layer of frustration once certain features do finally activate. Sometimes what looks like the start of a major bonus turns out to be little more than a credit award or a secondary reveal instead of the hold and spin style feature players were expecting. Even when you do reach the end of a bonus and unlock the final reveal mechanic, the outcome often feels flat. The prizes don't vary much, and more often than not, you're shown the same modest amount over and over again, which quickly drains any excitement the feature was supposed to create. All of this feeds into the bigger issue former technicians describe with Grand Legends: volatility. The game is built to swing hard. Long stretches of losses are common, occasionally broken up by a win that looks decent on the screen, but rarely does enough to bring you back to where you started. That kind of design can be especially dangerous because a cold streak can burn through a bankroll long before one of those bigger moments ever shows up. So while Grand Legends succeeds at being entertaining, and even enjoyable in short bursts, people who've worked behind the scenes say the math simply doesn't line up in the player's favor. For the amount you're betting, the returns just aren't there, especially when you compare it to simpler games with fewer moving parts. It's a slot that keeps you busy, keeps you hopeful, and keeps you pressing the button. But if you actually slow down and watch your balance instead of the animations, it becomes clear why so many former casino employees quietly steer players away from it. Which brings us back to that retired teacher I mentioned at the beginning. Her story involves the final machine on our list, and it's one of the most psychologically manipulative games in the entire casino. Machine number 9, Tiger and Dragon. The final machine on this list is Tiger and Dragon. It's another Asian-themed game, but one that's exploded in popularity thanks to its hold and spin feature. On the surface, it looks like everything players love. Bold colors, fast music, massive tiger and dragon symbols splashing across the reels, and a bonus round that makes every spin feel like it could be the big one. And that's exactly why so many people get pulled in. Former casino workers say Tiger and Dragon uses some of the most aggressive psychological tricks you'll find in modern slot design. The heart of the game is the hold and spin feature. Certain symbols lock in place, You're given respins, and the entire screen becomes a puzzle you're trying to complete. If you can fill enough positions or complete the right patterns, you unlock prizes and jackpots. The problem is how close the game constantly lets you get without ever finishing the job. According to former slot technicians, Tiger and Dragon is programmed to repeatedly pull players right up to the edge of major payouts. You'll trigger the feature, see several strong symbols lock in immediately, and then land one or two more during the respins. It feels like momentum is building, like the game is warming up. But the final symbols needed to complete those high-value patterns are weighted to appear far less often. You're shown exactly what you almost won, over and over again, without actually being given it. That near-miss effect is something we've talked about with other machines, but insiders say Tiger and Dragon leans into it especially hard. The game regularly leaves you one symbol short of something meaningful, just often enough that players start believing the next bonus will finally be the one. At the same time, the base game itself can feel punishing. Long stretches of dead spins are common, where nothing lines up and the screen goes quiet for extended periods. When wins do happen, they're usually small and scattered, doing very little to offset how much money is going out. That rhythm, long dry spells followed by brief flashes of hope, makes it especially difficult to maintain any kind of bankroll. Another issue former employees consistently point out is how confusing the betting structure can be. Even at lower limits, there are so many different bet options that players often aren't sure what they're supposed to be wagering. There's no clear advantage to choosing one amount over another, and for a game that already doesn't deliver many line hits, that confusion can become expensive very quickly, especially for players on a tighter budget. The bonus rounds don't always deliver the payoff players expect either. While there are technically two versions of the bonus, Tiger and Dragon, people who've worked around these machines say they're far more similar than they appear. They take a long time to play out, involve a lot of waiting, and often feel underwhelming once they're finished. Even when players manage to trigger both bonuses together, which is rare, the experience still doesn't consistently justify how much was spent getting there. And then there are the progressives. Tiger and Dragon advertises multiple jackpot levels, from mini all the way up to the grand. Seeing those amounts climb keeps hope alive. Every hold and spin feels like it could be the one that finally fills the screen. But insiders say the odds of hitting anything above the smallest jackpot are extremely long. Many players will pour enormous amounts of money into this machine without ever seeing more than the minimum. The game is designed to keep that belief alive. Every spin feels close, every bonus feels promising, every near miss reinforces the idea that a big win is just around the corner. And while players chase that moment, the math continues working steadily in the house's favor. One former floor manager from a Midwest casino shared a story she says she'll never forget. A retired elementary school teacher named Helen came in one Saturday morning after receiving her pension payout as a lump sum, just under $80,000. She sat down at Tiger and Dragon, convinced she could sense when the machine was about to pay. She'd played it before and had hit a few decent bonuses in the past. 6 hours later, more than $50,000 was gone. The manager said Helen kept triggering the hold and spin feature, kept getting close to the big patterns, and kept missing them by just one symbol. The machine gave her just enough small wins to keep her hopeful, just enough near misses to convince her she was on the verge of something big. By the time staff had to escort her out because she'd become distraught, most of her pension had already vanished. The last thing the manager remembers hearing was Helen repeating the same words over and over again. "I was so close." And that's exactly how Tiger and Dragon keeps people playing. So there you have it, 9 specific slot machines that former casino employees, people who worked on these games, programmed these games, watched thousands of players lose money on these games, say you should absolutely avoid. Subscribe to see which games you should actually play instead.